So we're going to go to the Gospels this week, and then we'll go to the writings of, I know the Gospels are the writings of the apostles, but like the letters and the Revelation and like those kind of things. We'll go over that next week. So this week we'll look at the Gospels. Not a ton of passages to go through, just because partially, one, they do it, make it explicit in some places, and two, they like to keep it somewhat cryptic, and three, they seem to kind of just assume that you are already understanding this when you've been going through the entirety of the Old Testament, just anticipating for this very thing to happen. Especially when Jesus drops a few, like, which seems to be like throwaway remarks or like throwaway passages, at least this way they're often preached sometimes, or like, ooh, look, this really cool thing, but they don't really talk about what it means. They're just assuming you already know that. So not a ton of passages, but they're very, very significant. And then we understand that, and you see how they're used in other places throughout the Gospels. You can just kind of see how it's all playing together. So we'll go through Matthew, a little bit of Mark, and a little bit of one passage of Luke. Start with Matthew 4, verse 1 through 11. Verse 1, Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry, and the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy cities and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came down and were ministering to him. In the wilderness, there's one obvious passage as being, or passages, books that is being referred to here. Exodus all the way through Deuteronomy. Their entire time they're in there. What is the very first challenge of the passage that the devil presents? Forget bread for a second. Think what bread is categorically bigger than that. Food. There's another very famous passage where there's a tempter and food. So the serpent and the fruit. So Jesus is being tested here. So we have Jesus in the wilderness, in the dry land, being tempted by the devil during his 40 days and 40 nights of fasting. First one he brings up is the food. So the obvious one, I think, is the parallel to, look, here's the manna. But you also have the very first prompt is like, why don't you get yourself this food? Kind of like I told Adam and Eve, why don't you take up this fruit? Rather than just wait on God, instead of just trusting him because he might not provide for you, why don't you take up this food? And we see that Jesus' faithfulness, at the very end, he's being ministered by the angels. So God does provide. And Jesus could provide it for this himself if he wanted to. I mean, the other thing is that turning the bread isn't the thing that's inherently wrong. It's the fact that it would be the posture behind why he's turning the bread. This is paralleling a little bit to the Genesis 3 narrative. We're going to have a series of testings of what seems good 3 times for Jesus by the devil. First test, food. Take of this, you'll be good. Okay. So either take this, is good for your eyes, it's good for your body. So the question is Jesus going to take it, or is he going to trust in the Father? He goes, I'm going to trust in the Father. Do you not? And he's quoted scripture back. Okay, so then the devil turns it up a bit. He's like, all right, let me do another thing that I did with Adam and Eve. Let me quote God's words to you. And so he says, oh yeah. So look, let me take up this holy city. Most scholars I've gone through is since Jesus is in the wilderness right now, there's a chance that because it's on the pinnacle of the temple, that this is probably more visionary related. See, the point is that they're engaged in this back and forth. And he said, yeah, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, let's see if God really trusts you. And he's like, here's the reason, he will command his angels concerning you. And on their hands, they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Like, look, he'll see, this is God's word. Why don't you try it out? Same thing did Adam and Eve, took his words. And Jesus is like, no, I'm not going to test God. Here's the fun thing, though. We actually read this psalm in our Chaos Monster series, Psalm 91. Okay, so he quotes verses 11 and 12. For he will give his angels charge concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will bear you up in their hands, that you do not strike your foot against a stone. Okay, sounds good, right? Okay, you didn't get that wrong. Read the next verse. You will tread upon the lion and the cobra, the young lion and the tynine you will trample down. he stops just short of this person, or God's provision will be to trample over the chaos creatures, which is the very thing the devil is. It's just very convenient that he stops there. I think that's kind of funny. Oh, you just happen to stop before that verse. So you're trying to test God and also trying to hope he doesn't know the next verse. Never mind the fact that he knows the next verse, but he's not going to call you out for it because he's just doing that right now. Then you get the third test of, okay, how about this? Bow down to me and I'll give you everything. The dragon has somehow this control over all the world. He has usurped this world, not from God, but on one hand from humanity, because humanity is like relinquished that to him. And he there is saying, okay, you want them back. I know God can take this from me, but you're human. You want them back? Bow to me. The very thing that he's been wanting the entire time. Since the very first moment, it's like, humans, bow to me, make me your God, make me the one you follow. Forget him. And if you are God, that's great, because now you're bowing to me, and I'm really the guy who's in charge here. Jesus says no. It's like, because Jesus knows that he's going to be taking it back anyways. So then the serpent leaves. Or I like how one commentator puts, if we're tying this back to Genesis 3, he slithers away for a time. We never hear from him again, really, like directly. You might see him here and there implicitly, but you don't hear from him for a while in this very, very explicit, direct way. Jesus takes the Adam and Eve and the Israel and the Moses narratives, as well as almost every other prophet narrative that deals with the wilderness, and completely goes, look, I passed every single one of those tests. I survived. I went through the wilderness. I came out within the 40 days and 40 nights. I did not give in to these 3 tests. These 3 tests by the dragon did not work. So, cool. We have our dragon slayer so far. He's tracking. Sweet. We have someone who's conquered the dragon so far, it seems. Now let's jump to Mark 6, and we'll parallel it with Matthew 14 as well, because some of them provides different information that is interesting. So within the Mark 6 passage, we get a couple interesting things. So first off, he sends his disciples out. They're in the boat. They're at the sea. He climbs a mountain. Another self-plug. We're doing a mountain podcast. So if you're curious about what that really entails, I'll go a little bit over later. More detail on the podcast series. So he's on the mountain, he's praying. And now we get a setting. When evening came, evening is around nighttime, it's getting closer to dark. We're in the dark setting. The boat was out on the sea. So we have darkness and we have the water. And he was alone on the land. And when he saw that they were making headway painfully, interesting choice, for the wind was against them. The wind's being personified. About the 4th watch of the night, darkness, he came to them walking on the sea. Very important that it does not say walking on water. It now bugs me that people keep calling it, yeah, Jesus walking on water. It never said that. It doesn't use the Greek word for that. The only time it ever uses that word is for Peter. It does not use that word for Jesus. Jesus walking on the sea. And it says in Mark, he meant to pass by them. When they said, I'm walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. They were terrified. And he says, take heart, I am, or ego I me, do not be afraid. Gets into the boat, spoke with them, and the wind ceased. Okay, so that's Mark's. Matthew adds a little bit extra details. So I'll just quickly go over them. We get the same thing with the mountain. You get they're being sent out. He's alone on the mountain. And then he goes forth. This is around evening, so it's in the dark. We're on the 4th watch of the night. So again, darkness. Interesting thing here is, and it's just saying he's watched them being like painfully going through this. It says, but the boat by this time was long away from the land, beaten by the waves. You're thinking, okay, water beaten up. The word there in Greek refers to torture and abuse. That's, it's only translated beaten because it's tied to the boat. But if we look at the next sentence, for the wind was against them. Well, it's not against the boat's singular. It's against the people in the boat, which means the waters are actually not there to fight the boat. They're there to torture the people in the boat. We're getting full-blown stormy chaos, trying to destroy the boat, to destroy them in there. Now Jesus, again, in the middle of this storm, in this dark, chaotic storm, he's just walking on the sea, very casually. He's just walking on it like it's nothing to him. Then we get Peter saying, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. We changed grammar now. We went from Jesus walking the thalassa to Peter saying, let me walk in the hudata. 2 very different words. Similar, still different. There's another passage that should come to mind with that. All the way back to Genesis 1. The stormy chaos waters to home, but with God present is just the mayim. Not the same root, two different words, being used similarly of each other. Jesus is walking across the chaos like it's just the mayim, and Peter's asking to walk over the mayim, even though Jesus is the one who's truly walking over to home. So we're getting very, in my opinion, very explicit divine moments right here, and Jesus' authority over chaos. Because the wind and the waters cease when he gets in the boat, and they're not affecting him, they're affecting his disciples, not him. Other interesting thing, when Peter's on the water, the reason he gets afraid is because he sees the wind. Last I checked, wind is not something you see the effects of wind, but wind is not something you really see. Could be a little bit of speculation, I'll grant, but Peter sees something. He sees something with the storm, freaks him out, it's tied to the wind, and he goes down. And then Jesus says, why do you doubt me? Caleb's favorite part, Jesus pulls him up with one hand, does not say hands, says hand, singular. Jesus apparently is totally jacked right now. Can just pull Peter up with one hand out of the water and put him in the boat.
Get over here!
All right, quoting Scorpion, sure. So Mark emphasizes the detail that the wind and sea ceases after he climbs in the boat. However, it should be noted that this is a human walking and trampling over chaos. Well, that sounds like something that the devil left out in his quoting of Psalm 91. Matthew has the extra details, of which I just went over, of how they're torturing, they're beating. The wind is scaring Peter because he sees something within the wind. Like he sees the wind, how great it is. Whether that means that was massive waves that he's seen, or maybe there was something else going on. I'm going to show why I think there's something else going on in another spot. We're going to go backwards a little bit to Mark 4, another instance with Jesus in the sea. So setting, first off, evening, night again, just like in the other passage. Sea, storm, wind. All the pieces of the chaos motif, just like the other sea narrative that we just saw with Jesus. Let's reference rebuke real quick. So if we trace rebuke within the Septuagint, you see it's used frequently in different cases. There is a common case, though, where it's used of God rebuking the wind or the sea or things related to that, or other words related to those root words. Mark 1 is the last time, or one of the last times we really see Jesus use this same set of language, which is interesting. So in Mark 1, we have very similar phrasing. Not exact, but very similar. I would just like to point that out. That is similar enough to comment on. So this is the first instance of Mark where he's encountered someone with an unclean spirit. And so people are astonished by his teachings, and a man with an unclean spirit enters the synagogue. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, be silent, come out of him. We're rebuking and being silent again. However, let's go back to Mark 4. So first off, within Septuagint, rebuking is something that is a lot of times tied to God. And it can be used of natural forces or the spiritual forces or of people. Now, of course, humans are known for rebuking each other as well, but in the way he's rebuking, in what he's rebuking, that's really only God does that. And the second thing that we just went over is, last time we saw Jesus directly rebuking and using the terms of being silent, was of an unclean spirit or multiple unclean spirits within this person. Third, this one I find the most fun. The word for be still might not be best translated be still, because in many other cases, it refers to shutting something up with a muzzle. Last I checked, you put muzzle on the mouths of things, and specifically creatures. And Jesus used that of peace, put a muzzle on it. Shut up. I'm locking you up. You're done talking. You're out. There's a bunch of cases. As for instance, in Deuteronomy 25:4, in the Septuagint, it reads, shut up is referred to as shut up with a muzzle. You have to make fast of his neck in the pillory, referring to some other texts. You have the idea of sealing up things. In other passages, it refers to muzzling, to put to silence, and it continues on with different cases, of which refers to like you're actually binding the mouth of something, and it's silent. It's not referring to being still. It's being referred to being put to silence and shutting it up. So we have Jesus rebuking the storm and putting the muzzle on the forces of chaos, and then they cease, and they're like, what the heck is this? And then it happens again, and this time Jesus is walking over it like it's nothing. While we don't have directly the dragon, we have the chaos motif, and Jesus has the power to just shut it up and to bind its mouth. Be like, nope, you're done. Tie it up. can't talk. Find that very interesting that that's the choice of words that Mark runs with there. That is not just peace, be still. It is, I'm binding you up. You're done talking. So we're getting, Jesus has the power over the chaos waters. We also have the fact that they're linked to something more than just mere natural forces, because he puts a muzzle on the wind. And the wind and the sea are personified in their attacking specifically the people. So it's not just a storm. There's something else going on here. And Matthew knows that, Matthew and Mark both know that their Jewish audiences are going to pick up on this. Or in this case, we are, because we're studying this, so we're going to pick up on this. Now, let's keep going to Matthew 12. Matthew 12, I referenced last week in our episode, so now I'll go in further detail on it. So it says, then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great, it says fish in most cases, I retranslate it to the great sea monster, so will the Son of Man by 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Okay, so why did Josh retranslate that? First off, in Hebrew, they use the word dog, which is fish. They completely, in our last episode, we talked about how they diminish the dragon by changing it and just calling it just merely a fish. But obviously this fish has more going on for it because it can swallow up Jonah, and then it's described as this female fish, and it's in his belly. And then it goes back to being the male fish and it pukes him up. And there's all these little languages that's being played around with what's going on there. However, the Septuagint and Jesus both use the Greek word, or at least Matthew in this case used the Greek word, which, if I were to refer to a lexicon like Lydell Scott, which in theirs, what they do a lot of is referencing other Greek texts and where it comes from, is used of a sea dragon and a sea monster that is within these other mythological texts. Now, it can also be translated as a great fish. That's plausible. But within this Greek context, is use of a great sea monster of sort. I think is really interesting. So within the sign of Jonah, we have the tie to Jonah directly. So even if we forget the sea monster for a second, what Jesus is alluding to with its narrative, with the chaos waters and its fish that is being replayed, as actually a dragon is being replayed and all these things that play into it. And then his and the Septuagint's use of the word for sea monster, got Jonah being in the belly for 3 days and 3 nights. So we see how it's tied to Kitos, referring to the dragon or sea monster. We see that it's the chaos kampf, as in the setting of it, the stormy waters. But it's all being sent by God this time. It's not like spiritual forces. This is all ones that God sends. Sometimes God uses the chaos creatures. And the chaos creatures saying are associated with death, disorder, non-order. In Jonah's prayer, he described his containment as being in the heart of Sheol, aka the underworld, and the chaos waters, which is the place of the monster and the fish, and is also the passageway to the underworld. We see in chapter 2, verse 1, and within the Hebrew and Greek, they take the whole, and he was swallowed up passage. We have that in English at the end of chapter 1. In Hebrew and Greek is at the beginning of chapter 2. Jonah is described as being in the belly of the Daga, which seems to be linked to some kind of new birth and pregnancy, or supposed to be new birth and pregnancy. Remember, this is all part of Jesus' sign that he's alluding to. He just refers to one passage, and all this is supposed to be clicking for them. All this is part of his description of the sign. The sign will be seen. It's the sign that they will be seeing is one where he will be swallowed up by the dragon. Except for Jonah's case, maybe he's trying to save the fishermen or the pirates who don't do anything within VeggieTales. But also it could be testing God. Like over this in my notes there, where he's like, just throw me in there. See if this stops. Stops. Sweet. Now I can die out here. Still don't have to go to Nineveh. Swallowed by a fish. Doesn't say that. That's one way to take it. Could also be like, maybe Jonah's heart is starting to change. Sort of. I find the first one a little more interesting, that he's trying to put God to the test, because now it's a complete look at how Jesus is a better Jonah. Just like with the Moses and these, like, and all those things. So Jonah, who probably reluctantly or is trying to escape God, goes in the waters. Now you have Jesus saying, yep, my sign is I'm going to be 3 days and 3 nights. Just like Jonah was in the belly of the fish. Or the sea monster. Which is in the waters, which is associated with death. But Jesus says that he's going to be in the heart of the earth. Well, the heart of the earth is under the ground, so that's the underworld. Most literally, that's the underworld. So he's saying that I'm going to be the heart of the underworld, which is, where does Jonah think he is? He's in the heart of Sheol. So it's going to be here where he resides 3 days and 3 nights. But where the comparison really stops, in terms of like the exact imagery and more in terms of the intention, is not that they come out, but the posture of the heart when they do. Jesus goes in willingly and comes out still willingly. And when he comes out, he's in his glorified state. Jonah goes in, comes out better than meh, but not great. He just starts to get like, okay, now we're playing further into this. Jesus is better than Jonah. Jesus is also willing to go in, not to escape his duties that God set forth, but to accomplish them. Jonah probably trying to escape them. Plan of salvation is to be consumed by the dragon. Just said, this is the sign. I'm going to be there. Well, how did Jonah get there? He was consumed by death. This is different than the dragon slaying motifs. Either they lost because they actually lost the dragon and they had to fight him again, or they killed the dragon just straight up. But Jesus is going a different direction. He's saying, I'm actually going to be surrender myself to the dragon for it to eat me, for it to swallow me. I'm not going to fight it directly. I'm actually going to get swallowed up by it. Because he's going through death with us and for us to pull us out. And this is all part of the dragon slaying motif. Where instead of the dragon slayer going in with a sword immediately just to cut it down, he's surrendering to be consumed by it, to let it think that it's beaten him. But instead he comes back out and he's glorified. His plan of salvation is to be consumed by the dragon so that he can destroy from the inside. Jesus' death is tied to the consuming of the dragon, but his resurrection is tied to the blow on the dragon, which sounds similar to that of Genesis 3, that he will strike his heel. He will strike your head. Jesus is going to allow the dragon to think it has won, but in fact, this is how Jesus wins against the dragon. So now we're taking the whole motif and just completely flipping it around. Now I'm just like, hey, let's diminish the dragon. The dragon beats the dragon slayer, quote unquote. But the dragon slayer does it on purpose. Doesn't throw the fight, but he tricks it into doing something else. Jonah, Jesus is saying, just like this, where Jonah was in the fish, and he uses the word kitos, which is the word for a sea monster. But even if you forget that part and just take the great fish, the entire setting is that of the chaos monster motif. You have the dark, you have the storm, you got the waters. And then you got Jonah reflecting on the waters as if it is the heart of Sheol. And he's in the fish, and he's tying that to Sheol, to death. All of this is chaos language, minus the dragon, where he just kind of, the author, would be Jonah or someone else, takes it and is like, it's just a fish. Why? Because God sent it. So it's not something that God has to fight. God has to rescue him from it. He just sends it. And Jesus says that, yeah, I'm going in, and I'm going to be coming out. Just like Jonah did. But instead of it being puked out, he's basically busting out, because he's going in there to go into death to then be resurrected, of which the apostles make it really interesting. They'll either say the Father did it, the Son did it, or the Spirit did it. Either way, the triune God is an action in the resurrection. And it's him coming out of death that then brings about the glorified state. And he ties that entire action of his resurrection and his death to that of what happens to Jonah, which Jonah is tying it to the chaos monster motif. So all of it is Jesus going, I'm going the dragon, and I'm going to come out and destroy it. All of it, Jesus is expecting that his viewers that know what Jonah's teaching there, he's expecting that you know your Jonah fairly well, and it's implying. Because if he's supposed to be the greater Jonah, not only is like Jonah, he's not going to escape God's purposes, it is God's purpose for him to be swallowed up by death. It is for him to be swallowed up into chaos. It's also his purpose for him to bust out, not be puked out, where he's like, all right, bring him back up, throw him out. And you have a reluctant heart. Jesus goes from regular old incarnate him to glorified incarnate him. And this is all tied to that dragon motif. So it's not like Jesus saying, hey, dragon, let's work this out here. Because then you see later on in the apostles' letters and John that, no, there's a dragon and it's going to be cut down and it's going to be set on fire and burnt away. Every other time it talks about the dragon, except for 2 cases, maybe 3, where it explicitly talks about it. It's like, yeah, it's just there to play. But most of the time it's like, no, it's a monster and it will be cut down. Luke 10. So they've returned from the commissioning. Again, 70, 72, depends on the translation, the manuscript, the book you're reading. Either way, it's tied to the Table of Nations, which I think is pretty cool. And then it happens again at Pentecost. Just saying, it's pretty cool. That they were to go out and expand this kingdom, or the message of the kingdom, of which had a serious threat on the dragon, which in this case is being tied to the devil, who's shown to be falling, of which what is the very thing he promised Jesus earlier? Bow to me and I give you my kingdom. And Jesus says, yep, sending you out to spread about my kingdom, and his is coming down. He is falling. His rule is about to go out. Awesome. Awesome picture here. His kingdom is crumbling with the expansion of God's kingdom. To expand the kingdom brings about the falling of hold of the dragon. So the hold that the dragon has on this world, that the devil has on this world, comes apart when you start expanding the kingdom of God. Because now you got the Holy Spirit stepping in and being like, you can't compete with me. You're not gonna possess this person. You're not gonna do this or that. He's mine. Try all you want. See what happens. And so the disciples of Jesus are given this authority and power over the enemies. Okay? However, looking at a very interesting verse, after he mentions the falling of Satan, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions. Both are chaos creatures. Serpents being our snake, dragon image. Scorpions being from the Sade, from the wilderness, and also sometimes used as chaos creatures in general. In fact, they're used in, I think it's the epic, either the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Baal cycle. It's one of those two, where scorpions are, I believe, are mentioned as being one of the enemies that gods have to fight. And over all the power of the enemy. So now you have serpents and scorpions and all the power of the enemy. They're linked together. So the chaos creatures and all those outside. And he's like, yeah, you're going to trample over them and nothing will hurt you. Then he has a really interesting statement, really next. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this. So he's saying, don't rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you. That's not what you should be rejoicing about, that you have this power. Rejoice in the fact that your names are written. And if we're thinking about how Christianity is very much a communal thing, rejoice about the fact that those you preach the gospel to, and they receive it, their names are now in the kingdom of heaven. Don't celebrate about the fact that you have this power, because that power really is just me working through you. Celebrate the fact that your name's in heaven, you're in the skies, you're in the kingdom of heaven, and so are those who have now received this kingdom, who have now received this message. This is before Jesus' death and resurrection. And then what happens later after the resurrection? He sends out his other commission to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So he commissions them again, except now there's also the helper that is coming, the Spirit, where we see later in Acts, he arrives. And then you get passages like Paul, where he's going all over the place. And it's kind of like, why is he doing that? Because he took that skit to the whole world, literally. As far as he knew the world could go, he was going there. So he's reaching as far as he can go, which makes me laugh because, like, up in heaven, in the presence of God, he's looking, I was like, what? There was more? You told me I only had a fraction of the world? But, like, that was his passion. It's like, I'm going to reach as many people as I can. Peter's like, I'm going to reach as many Jews as I can because they should be knowing this is true and they're rejecting this. We got to fix this. Paul's like, I'm going to reach the Jews because my heart is for them because I was like them. I'm also going to reach the Gentiles. And that commission, I would argue, is probably a even greater one than this commission because now the Spirit is present, fully involved in this. Now, like this temporal thing, it's the Spirit's with you. That's it. You're going, Spirit's with you, Spirit's with your church. You might have struggles, but it's not like I gave you this authority temporarily and you come back to me and now, like, I have to send you back out again. It's like, nope, I sent you out. You're all sent out. And you don't need me directly sending you out anymore in that idea, like the apostles are there. The Spirit's just going to send you out because he's the helper sending them all out. This is all tied to the very fact that Jesus has basically slayed the power of the dragon. And he's saying, now those of you who follow me, you have my power and authority to go out there and keep cutting down that dragon. Don't worry. I'm going to come again. That dragon's going to be completely wiped out.